The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind that belonged to empty deserts or deep space, but a silence that felt organized, deliberate, almost engineered. Every movement in the alien settlement happened with precision. No unnecessary gestures. No raised voices. No laughter. No hesitation. It was as if emotion itself had been edited out of existence. He lay hidden behind a cluster of crystalline rock formations, his observation equipment humming quietly beside him. The mission briefing replayed in his mind with uncomfortable clarity: observe only, record everything, interfere with nothing. The species he was studying had fascinated scientists for decades. A civilization built entirely on logic. No art, no music, no emotional language. Just efficiency, structure, and perfect rationality. For a xenobiologist, it was paradise. He adjusted the lens and focused on the central area of the settlement, where dozens of tall, elegant figures moved in smooth, synchronized patterns. Their bodies were lean, their movements fluid but restrained, their expressions unreadable. They communicated with brief tonal signals and subtle shifts in posture, like equations being solved in real time. He whispered notes into his recorder, describing their behavior with excitement he struggled to suppress. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was overflowing with emotion while studying a species that allegedly had none. Hours passed without incident, until something unexpected happened. A small alien child wandered away from the main group, approaching a mechanical structure that emitted faint pulses of energy. The pulses grew unstable. Even from a distance, he could tell the device was malfunctioning. He froze. Interference was forbidden. But the child stepped closer. His logical mind argued with his instincts. If the device overloaded, the consequences could be lethal. If he intervened, he would violate protocol and risk interstellar diplomatic fallout. He hesitated for a fraction of a second too long, then moved. He emerged from hiding and crossed the open ground quickly, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. The child turned, eyes widening at the sight of a human. Before it could react, he gently pulled it back and deactivated the device with a quick adjustment. The child stared at him, silent, unafraid, simply observing. Then the world around him shifted. Dozens of alien figures turned simultaneously. Every conversation stopped. Every movement froze. Their gaze locked onto him with surgical intensity. He swallowed. Within moments, a figure stepped forward from the center of the group. She was taller than the others, her posture perfectly straight, her presence commanding without aggression. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, and possibly calm. She studied him the way scientists study rare phenomena, not with fear, but with curiosity and evaluation. He raised his hands slightly in a universal gesture of peace. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said softly, knowing his words would be filtered through translation algorithms. The device was unstable. The child was in danger. The translation system transmitted his words into their tonal language. The surrounding aliens murmured among themselves in low, rhythmic patterns. She stepped closer. He tried to remember every cultural briefing he had studied. Maintain distance. Avoid sudden movements. Do not stare directly into the eyes of a leader for too long. He forced himself to lower his gaze slightly, then inclined his head in what he hoped looked respectful rather than submissive. She watched him carefully, her expression unchanged. He felt strangely nervous, which annoyed him. He had faced hostile environments, unpredictable ecosystems, and even armed confrontations before. Yet this silent, emotionless gaze unsettled him more than any visible threat. After a moment, she spoke. The translation reached him a heartbeat later. "Your actions have been recorded." He nodded. "I understand." She tilted her head slightly, as if processing multiple layers of data at once. "You initiated physical intervention. You redirected potential harm. You performed a gesture of acknowledgement. You lowered your visual focus." He blinked. "Yes. Those are normal behaviors where I come from." A faint ripple passed through the group behind her. "Not emotion, analysis." She continued, her voice even. In our culture, these behaviors represent a formal sequence. His stomach tightened. Sequence of what? He asked. There was a brief pause. Not hesitation, but computation. Declaration of bonding intent. For a second, he thought the translation had malfunctioned. Sorry, he said, forcing a laugh that sounded too loud in the silent air. That can't be right. I was just being polite. She looked at him with unwavering focus. Politeness is not recognized as a functional category in our sociological framework. The sequence you performed has only one interpretation. The surrounding aliens shifted their stance slightly, forming a subtle semicircle around them. He realized he was standing at the center of something far bigger than a misunderstanding. His mind raced. Bonding intent? Mating? Ritual? He remembered fragments from obscure research papers about symbolic behaviors among logical species, but none had seemed relevant, until now. I didn't intend anything like that, he said quickly. I'm here to observe. That's all. She studied him for several long seconds. The silence stretched so thin it felt physical. Intent is irrelevant, she finally said. Action defines meaning. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Logic versus logic. He was losing on their terms. Around them, the tribe began moving again, but not as before. Their patterns had changed. Subtle shifts in position created new geometric formations around him. He felt like a variable introduced into a perfectly balanced equation. The child he had saved stood nearby, watching him with quiet interest. The leader turned her gaze back to him. You will accompany us, she said. He hesitated. Is that a request? No, she replied. It is a procedural necessity. As they began walking toward the central structure of the settlement, he followed reluctantly, his mind spinning. He had come here to study a species famous for its lack of emotion, its flawless logic, its resistance to chaos. And yet, in less than 5 minutes, he had somehow triggered what appeared to be the most intimate cultural process they possessed. He glanced at his recorder, still quietly capturing every detail. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrible realization formed. He had not just broken protocol. He had accidentally proposed to an entire alien civilization. And judging by the calm, calculating expression of the leader walking beside him, the real experiment had only just begun. They did not restrain him. That fact alone made everything worse. If they had tied his hands or locked him in some kind of alien containment field, he could have framed the situation as a crisis, a problem with clear parameters. But instead, they treated him like something far more dangerous and far more important. An honored anomaly. As he walked through the settlement beside her, the logical precision of their world became painfully obvious. Pathways were arranged in perfect geometric lines. Structures were built not for beauty but for optimal function. Every alien moved with purpose, never wasting a step or glance. And yet, everywhere he went, he felt their attention on him. Not hostile. Not friendly. Evaluative. Inside the central structure, the atmosphere shifted. The interior was vast, illuminated by soft, neutral light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Symbols flowed across translucent surfaces like mathematical poetry. Groups of aliens stood in circular formations, their communication patterns intensifying as he entered. She stopped in the center of the chamber. He stopped too. You are now within the decision core, she said. That sounds comforting, he replied weakly. Several aliens turned their heads toward him at the same time. She ignored his tone. The tribe must determine whether your actions constitute intentional cultural engagement or random behavioral noise. Can I vote? He asked. She looked at him again, that same unreadable expression. Voting is an inefficient method of truth extraction. He sighed quietly. A group of elders, at least he assumed they were elders, approached. Their posture was slightly different, their movements slower but heavier with authority. They circled him, scanning him with handheld devices that hummed softly. He felt like a specimen under a microscope. He is biologically fragile, one of them said after a moment. Fragility is not disqualifying, she replied. Another elder tilted its head. He lacks visible defensive adaptations. He compensated with strategic intervention, she said. He blinked. I'm standing right here, you know. No one acknowledged that comment. The elders began exchanging rapid tonal signals, their voices overlapping in complex harmonic patterns. The translation device struggled to keep up, spitting fragments of meaning into his ear. Sequence confirmed. Historical precedent minimal. Probability of deliberate deception low. He felt a chill. She raised her hand slightly, and the chamber fell silent again. The conclusion is statistically stable, she announced. Every gaze returned to him. You will undergo verification trials. He frowned. Verification of what? Compatibility. The word echoed in his mind in a way he did not like. Before he could protest, the floor beneath him shifted. Sections of the chamber rearranged themselves with mechanical elegance, forming a circular platform surrounded by vertical panels filled with shifting symbols. She stepped onto the platform with him. The rest of the tribe watched from a distance. Trial 1, she said calmly. Cognitive adequacy. A panel rose from the floor, projecting a three-dimensional structure of glowing shapes. The shapes rotated, separated, merged, and transformed in patterns too complex to follow at first glance. Your objective, she said, is to identify the governing principle of this system and predict its next transformation. He stared at the shapes. They were beautiful in a strange, terrifying way. His scientific training kicked in automatically. He searched for patterns, mathematical ratios, symmetries, and logical progressions. For several seconds he saw nothing. Then he noticed something else. The transformations weren't purely logical. They were playful. He tilted his head, watching the rhythm of the changes. Instead of calculating equations, he imagined the shapes as characters in a story, approaching, retreating, hesitating, colliding, reconciling. He smiled slightly. Next transformation, he said slowly, will look like that one, but wrong on purpose. The shapes shifted. Exactly as he predicted. A ripple moved through the chamber. She looked at him more intently now. How did you determine this outcome? She asked. He shrugged. It felt like it wanted to surprise itself. Several aliens exchanged rapid signals. Feeling is not a valid analytical tool, one elder said. Neither is boredom, he replied without thinking. The translation device carried his words perfectly. For the first time, he saw something unusual among them, not emotion, but disruption. The second phase of the trial began immediately. The platform extended outward, opening into a simulated environment. The air temperature changed. The light dimmed. Sounds appeared: wind, distant vibrations, unfamiliar frequencies. This environment replicates a hazardous scenario, she explained. Your objective is survival without external assistance. He took a cautious step forward. The ground beneath him shifted unpredictably. Strange mechanical structures emerged from the floor, moving with mechanical precision. Energy pulses flashed across the simulated landscape. He realized quickly that brute force would fail. He had no weapons, no advanced tools, and no physical advantage. So he did what humans had always done best. He improvised. He observed the rhythm of the hazards, the timing of the energy pulses, the pattern of structural movements. Instead of fighting them, he synchronized his movements with them. He used shifting platforms as stepping stones, redirected energy pulses to disable obstacles, and even tricked one mechanical construct into dismantling another. From outside the simulation, the tribe watched in silence. He does not dominate the environment, one observer noted. He negotiates with it, another replied. Inside the simulation, he reached the final zone. A massive energy barrier blocked his path. He stared at it, then looked around. There was no obvious solution. So he sat down. The observer stiffened. After a few seconds, the barrier weakened slightly. He smiled, stood up, and walked through as it collapsed. The simulation ended. When he returned to the platform, slightly out of breath, he noticed something unsettling. She was still watching him. But now, her gaze had changed. Not colder. Not warmer. More focused. "You chose inaction as a strategic variable," she said. "Sometimes," he replied. "Doing nothing is the smartest move." Another ripple of tonal signals spread through the chamber. The elders convened again, their voices weaving complex analytical patterns. He felt like he was standing at the center of a storm made entirely of logic. After a long moment, she stepped closer. "You have exceeded predicted performance thresholds," she said. "That sounds good," he said cautiously. "It is neither good nor bad," she replied. "It is unexpected." Unexpected felt dangerous in a civilization built on predictability. The elders delivered their verdict. "The subject demonstrates unconventional cognitive structures," one declared. "His methods deviate from established logical frameworks yet produce efficient outcomes," another added. "Deviation without inefficiency is statistically rare." She turned to him. "Therefore," she said, "your participation in the bonding sequence will proceed to the next phase." His stomach dropped. Somewhere deep inside the chamber, a resonant tone sounded, slow and deliberate, like the ticking of a cosmic clock. He realized with sudden clarity that the trials were not designed to test his strength. They were designed to test whether a human mind could disrupt an entire civilization built on logic. And judging by the way she continued to look at him, no longer as an intruder, but as a problem worth solving, he suspected that the most difficult trial had not even begun. The chamber settled into a tense silence that felt heavier than anything he had experienced in the previous trials. The first two had been challenging in ways he could measure, logic puzzles, survival simulations, but this one was different. This one had no rules, no formulas, no clear endpoint. She called it the trial of emotional honesty. The words themselves seemed designed to contradict everything the aliens valued. Emotions were chaos. Emotions were unpredictability. Emotions were illogical. Yet here he was, standing in a chamber that had transformed itself into an arena of personal revelation, surrounded by a species that regarded him as both anomaly and teacher. She stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "This trial requires you to communicate the core of your species' irrational behaviors." Her translation device rendered her voice into calm, neutral tones, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. He blinked, realizing immediately that she wasn't asking for performance. She wanted understanding. Actual, human understanding, expressed in words and actions. And he had no idea where to begin. We laugh when it hurts," he started, half joking, half serious, his hands gesturing awkwardly. "We make jokes about bad situations, about failure, about fear. We use it to connect, to survive, to cope." He trailed off. She remained silent, her face impassive but intensely focused. Around them, the chamber shifted subtly, panels highlighting patterns he could not decipher, yet he felt they were reactions to the content of his words. She tilted her head slightly. "Define connection. Specify survival benefit. Quantify coping mechanisms." He laughed, a soft, nervous sound. "You're taking everything literally, aren't you?" The device transmitted the laughter faithfully. For a species that had supposedly eliminated emotion from every social transaction, that laugh seemed to ripple through the chamber like a wave breaking against a cliff. She did not recoil, she did not interrupt, but the tone of the room changed ever so slightly. Subtle adjustments in posture, shifts in orientation. Observation, processing, recalibration. "I mean," he continued, encouraged by the faint changes, "we bond through shared experiences. Sometimes it's small stuff, sometimes big stuff. Sometimes it's just noticing each other and choosing to care. Even when caring seems unnecessary, even when it doesn't help survival. That's kind of our point." There was a pause. The kind of pause that stretches seconds into eternities. He could feel the collective attention of the tribe like a physical presence, their analysis computational and relentless. And then, Unexpectedly, she asked a question that made him stumble. Does this method ever fail? Yes, he admitted immediately, shrugging. A lot. But we keep trying. And somehow, it usually works out. She regarded him silently, scanning something invisible. He could sense that she was not trying to understand as a scientist, but as a participant. Her logical mind was being challenged, perhaps even stretched, by these ineffable human concepts. And then she said something entirely unexpected. Explain fear. Fear. He swallowed, realizing that it wasn't just a word here, it was a challenge. Not survival, not intelligence, but the heart, the intangible. Fear, he began, is a warning. But it also teaches us about limits. And sometimes it brings people together. Shared fear, shared worry, even shared embarrassment, it creates trust. It creates understanding. He glanced at her, unsure if she could comprehend, and yet he continued. We don't run from emotion. We use it. We improvise with it. We survive because of it, not in spite of it. She stepped closer, the calmness of her presence both intimidating and strangely intimate. Observation. You use emotion as a functional tool. Result. Increased adaptability and resilience. Hypothesis. Emotion is beneficial. Contradiction. Species definition requires elimination of such factors. He couldn't help but grin despite the tension. Yeah, well, humans are full of contradictions. There was a subtle vibration through the chamber, almost imperceptible, like the low hum of understanding. He realized then that the trial wasn't about his ability to explain humans. It was about her ability to process the impossible. She was observing him, yes, but she was also observing herself, her own reactions to a being that defied the rules of her civilization. Do you value survival over connection? She asked. No, he said immediately. Connection gives survival meaning. It's why we keep going when logic fails. It's why we improvise when rules break. And it's why we care. Something shifted in her stance. A flicker in the precision of her posture, a slight relaxation in the rigid alignment of her body. Not human, not fully emotion, but something. A variable he could not measure. The elders exchanged rapid tonal signals. He felt the tension rise again, but this time, it was different. Their discussion wasn't about punishment or protocol, it was about comprehension. Their analytical minds were grappling with a phenomenon they had never quantified, the human heart, irrational, unpredictable, brilliant. She turned to him, her expression as neutral as ever, yet he sensed the weight behind her words. Your species demonstrates a novel survival model. Conclusion: efficiency is enhanced when unpredictability is incorporated. Result: compatibility persists despite chaos. He blinked, processing the alien phrasing. Then it hit him. She wasn't just observing him. She was adapting because of him. He had forced a civilization built on pure logic to recognize the value of improvisation, of choice, of irrationality. The trial was over, but the effect lingered. Every step he took afterward felt less like compliance, and more like negotiation. She had tested him, yes, but in the process, he had tested her too. And in that subtle, almost imperceptible shift, he realized that the distance between human and alien was narrowing, not through emotion alone, but through the shared recognition of intelligence, creativity, and courage. For the first time, he noticed it, the faintest trace of curiosity in her eyes, something that was not calculation, not assessment, but interest. A spark that had no place in their rigid society, yet here it was, undeniable. And as he stood there, the weight of what had just occurred settled on him. He had survived the trial of emotional honesty. But more than that, he had introduced chaos, unpredictability, and perhaps unintentionally, the first stirrings of something she had never experienced before. Something called connection. He didn't know what the next trial would bring, but one thing was certain: he was no longer merely an observer. He had become a participant in a culture that had never expected to change, and maybe, just maybe, he was changing it. The chamber remained silent after the emotional trial, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was expectant, anticipatory, almost electric. He could feel it pressing against him, the weight of hundreds of logical minds waiting for a conclusion they had never anticipated. She stood a few paces away, her gaze steady and unflinching, yet there was something new in it, an acknowledgement that their rigid frameworks were no longer sufficient. He realized then that the final ritual was not about proving himself. It was about redefining what her civilization could comprehend. He took a deep breath, forcing calm over the storm of his thoughts. Every step he had taken since arrival had been calculated to survive, to adapt, to negotiate. But the ritual, whatever form it was about to take, would not respond to calculation alone. It demanded creativity, improvisation, and a willingness to bend rules without breaking them. He glanced around the chamber, noting how every panel, every line of light, seemed to anticipate his movement. This was no longer a trial for him. This was a stage set for the culmination of everything he had done. She began to speak, her voice calm and precise. The final stage requires the establishment of a bond. Traditional procedure dictates physical demonstration, symbolic adherence, and formalized acknowledgement. Deviation results in cultural destabilization. He swallowed. And I'm supposed to do what exactly? She did not answer directly. Instead, she stepped closer, gesturing toward the circular platform in the center of the chamber. You may proceed according to your species' logic. The decision is yours. Resultant action will define compatibility. Compatibility. The word repeated in his mind, but this time it carried a different weight. He was not here to survive a trial or satisfy alien curiosity. He was here to show them the essence of humanity, choice, creativity, and the ability to forge connection without coercion. He took a deep breath and did the only thing he could think of. He stepped onto the platform and began to speak, not in technical jargon, not in cautious diplomacy, but in the raw honesty that humans often used when formal rules failed. I came here to observe. I didn't plan to interact. I certainly didn't plan to disrupt your society. But I also know something now: connection isn't a formula. It isn't a sequence of gestures or a set of rituals. It's understanding. It's respect. It's choice. He paused, noticing the way her eyes, those unreadable eyes, flickered ever so slightly, processing something beyond pure logic. I can't follow your traditional rituals because they assume intention where none existed. But I can offer something different: mutual understanding. I can acknowledge your rules, your culture, your logic, and still participate in a bond that doesn't destroy your framework. A bond that grows from shared experience, not obligation. The chamber vibrated subtly. The elders shifted, their tonal signals overlapping in rapid sequences. He didn't need to understand the exact content. The energy told him everything. They were not angry. They were not disapproving. They were recalculating. The human mind, the unpredictable mind, had forced them to confront a new variable: choice and improvisation as valid forms of interaction. She moved closer, finally bridging the gap between observer and participant. Your proposal is untested, she said. Deviation from protocol carries risk. He nodded. I know. But if anything about humans is predictable, it's that we adapt. We survive. And we connect. Her eyes narrowed, not in judgment but in concentration. The rest of the chamber remained silent, watching. Then, with deliberate precision, she raised her hand and made a signal. A single, clean tone echoed, and the panels around them shifted to display a new pattern. It was not a trial configuration. It was acknowledgement. Acceptance. You have redefined the parameters, she said softly. Your species' methodology is efficient in an unexpected dimension. It is not traditional. It is not replicable. Yet it produces results. Your bond is recognized. He exhaled, a tension he didn't realize he'd been holding dissolving in a rush. He had survived the trials. He had challenged the tribe's assumptions. He had proven that human creativity, emotion, and adaptability were strengths in ways the aliens could not have anticipated. The elders circulated around them, transmitting signals of approval, adjustment, and new directives. He glimpsed calculations being rewritten, traditions being amended, and cultural frameworks expanding before his eyes. His presence had not merely survived their trials, he had reshaped their society's understanding of connection, intelligence, and emotion. She stepped closer, just far enough that he could sense her presence without feeling threatened. Observation confirmed. Integration initiated. Relationship, undefined but viable. He couldn't help but grin. Undefined but viable. That sounded about right for humans. Not everything needed to be rigidly categorized. Not everything needed precedent. Some things simply existed because they worked. As he followed her from the platform, the chambers shifting and adapting behind them, he realized something else. He hadn't just observed an alien species. He had introduced them to an idea that had no name in their language, no formula, no precedent. He had introduced them to choice, to improvisation, and, in the quietest, most human way, to connection. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. A new model for interstellar diplomacy, for cross-species understanding, for human ingenuity triumphing in unexpected ways. For the first time since he arrived, he laughed, a small, triumphant sound that echoed softly in the chamber. Not because he had survived, not because he had proven something to them, but because he realized that humans, with all their chaos and imperfection, had a strength the universe had yet to truly quantify. And judging by the subtle shift in her posture, the faint recognition of unpredictability in her gaze, he suspected that she understood it too. In a world built entirely on logic, the human had introduced the ultimate variable, choice, courage, and the beautifully unpredictable nature of connection. He walked beside her, uncertain what the future held, but certain of one thing: sometimes survival was not enough. Sometimes it was the mind, the heart, and the willingness to bend rules that changed everything. And in that truth, humans were unparalleled. The trials were over. The bond had begun. And the galaxy would never look at logic, or love, the same way again.